Less than 2 weeks from Election Day, let's dig into the heart of the matter with John Couvillon. Roll it, Kirk. Well, you either love it or you hate it, but it's political season. Here we are. John Couvillon, with JMC.com, pollster, political analyst, and man, we're less than 2 weeks away from Election Day. 2 segments with JC talking about the mayoral election, and then in the next segment, we'll talk about the top of the ticket POTUS, the presidential election. Let's start with the mayor's race. It's been a very interesting week this week with that latest ad that came out, but where does everything stand right now?
The way I look at the mayor's race is this: you really have to view it regardless of what the specific poll numbers or the trends are. You have to look at it through the lens of the presidential race, because both are on the ballot at the same time. Mm-hmm. And what I have seen in both 2016 and 2020 is the total Democratic vote and the total Republican vote does tend to mirror what each presidential candidate is getting in East Baton Rouge Parish.
Let's talk about the impact of Sid Edwards in this race. It's been very, very interesting depending on where you look. What's his impact?
The impact he has is that he, relatively speaking, is the stronger Republican. There is, you have Nathaniel Hearn, mm-hmm. you have Tammy Cook, who alphabetically is the first person on the ballot. Yeah. That can pull some votes away. But he's really what I think of as the de facto Republican nominee in the mayor-president's race.
So this last poll that was done caused a lot of consternation among people who were watching the politics. It showed that Ted James had leapfrogged everyone and was in first place. I'm struggling with that one, John, because for me, it's hard to believe that Mayor President Broome would not be number one, or that there wouldn't be some toggling between Coach Edwards and Ted James. What can you tell us about that?
So there's really 2 parts about it. There is, what I previously said about the presidential race. There's also what you'd said about Mayor Broome. And by the way, there is a precedent for her struggling, and that is similar incumbent African-American mayors in Alexandria, Shreveport, and Monroe mm-hmm. have had problems as well with their reelection. Now, when you take that and juxtapose it against the presidential election, you figure that Kamala Harris will probably get about 55% of the vote in our parish. Mm-hmm. So that 55% is going to be apportioned in some way, shape, or form between Mayor President Broome and Ted James.
Right.
I think about a 40-15 split between the two.
Yeah.
Then we have the 45% that's going to go to Donald Trump. Uh-huh. And so the challenge Ted James has is he has to get a chunk of that 45, I would say about 15.
Yeah.
In other words, he's going for what I call the Troy Carter strategy, which is having a broad coalition, whereas Mayor Broome is basically the Democratic base candidate, and I see Sid Edwards as the Republican base candidate, with, of course, some votes going to Steve Myers, going to Tammy Cook, going to Nathaniel Hearn, et cetera, et cetera.
It's interesting because the impact of Sid Edwards on this has really been, I think without him in this race, we might not be talking about the runoff later on in the election cycle. Where he is with Republicans now is interesting, and I want to talk about the recent ad that was run digitally and on radio, where there was a recording apparently of Ted James talking about his relationships with Republicans. There's a quote in there where he says he's a woke MAGA guy or whatever it is, and I heard that ad and was thinking about it, and you and I chatted. I really believe that was about peeling Republican votes away from Ted James to ensure that Sid Edwards gets into the runoff. What are your thoughts?
Well, the thing about it is Ted James's challenge is that he has to pull from both sides of the spectrum if he wants to make it the runoff.
Correct.
And see, the thing that's interesting is that theoretically, if he pulls enough black votes from Mayor Broome and he can pull enough Republican votes, he can run first. Mm-hmm. And then the question then becomes, do Mayor Broome and or Sid Edwards battle for second place? So that's what's kind of interesting, is this base versus coalition type of election that we see unfolding here in East Baton Rouge Parish.
There's a lot of money all of a sudden being spent here now. Representative Ted James now has $1 million that he's spending on it. You've got the money that's coming in now a little bit to Sid Edwards. I'm again curious as to see whose get out the vote machine will be the best and most aggressive.
And see, the thing that's interesting about this is I'm going to say what should not be said or could not be politely said. The individual GOTV machines of the mayor's races, to me, are relatively irrelevant for the simple reason that we have the presidential race at the top of the ballot. And by the way,
so they're going to pull people out anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In other words, by the virtue of there being a presidential race. And by the way, what's interesting is while Louisiana is having record early voting turnout, East Baton Rouge Parish's numbers are relatively soft, which I would give a slight advantage to Sid Edwards, because we're talking about not just in East Baton Rouge Parish in Louisiana, but in Georgia and North Carolina, black voters are not voting.
I want to talk more with John about the early voting numbers. Alyssa, we'll probably get out of this segment a little bit early to add to segment 2, because I want to talk about what you've seen in terms of the early voting numbers. And then, of course, the top of the ticket, the presidential election. It's been everything from a drama to a sitcom, and we'll talk more about that with John Couvillon next. Back with John Couvillon talking politics here. Let's talk about early voting before wrapping up our conversation on the mayor's race. Where are we?
Louisianans are early voting in record numbers. More specifically, as of Wednesday night, we were at 519,000, which is only 12,000 behind what it was in 2016 and 400,000 behind what it was in 2020. Where I'm going with this is I'm of the opinion we'll probably crack 600,000 at the conclusion of today, Thursday.
Yeah.
And most likely by the time early voting is over, I think we could be in the 900,000 to 1 million early voting mark, which is roughly 45% of the electorate. But what's interesting about this, which by the way does have national repercussions, it is who is early voting.
Okay.
More specifically, this is the first time ever I have seen Republicans lead after 5 days of early voting. We're talking about a 9-point statewide Republican lead. Early voting turnout in East Baton Rouge Parish is down, which, by the way, is a Democratic parish. The black percent of the early vote is down 7, which, by the way, I'm seeing in Georgia and North Carolina as well. So you can see who is early voting does have repercussions, whether we're going from the Archives building here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to Washington, D.C.
So when we chatted about this in August, about the presidential election, I think we both agreed at the time, even after the assassination attempt, that Vice President Harris had a healthy amount of momentum.
At the time,
At the time, in August, coming in, and it looked like she was trending in the direction of winning. I think that momentum has been blunted now.
Correct.
And if you look at the battleground states, former President Trump leads in all of them. This is a fantastic website, realclearpolitics.com, and it shows where they are. It's a composite of a bunch of national polls that look at that election.
Yes.
So let's talk about the shift in momentum and what may have caused that thing to flip.
There's a couple things that have gone on. Number one, I'm of the opinion that Harris's lead was purely built on the fact that there were Democrats who were not going to support Joe Biden in any poll, that when you had someone with a heartbeat and was coherent.
Dang, John.
Yeah, I'm polite. But so that several percent of the vote flocked to Kamala Harris immediately after she jumped in, or should I say she was substituted. And of course, as you remember, she vaulted from a 3-point poll deficit that Joe Biden had to a 2-point poll lead. However, a critical thing happened, and that was her 2-point lead held. It never expanded.
Yeah.
And that 2-point lead, by the way, is not sufficient to amass 270 electoral votes. Now that 2-point lead, and I have a theory about what's changed it. Number one, the Jack Smith dropping the 165-page indictment, which I think created sympathy for Trump. Number two, Kamala Harris's disastrous interview on Bret Baier, where she basically showed that, you know, let's just say perhaps she needs to learn to bob and weave a little better.
I thought strategically that one didn't make sense because, look, if the strategy is to do an interview with Fox that is always going to have a juxtaposition against her on policy, you choose someone like Hannity, where it would be a sideshow. Bret Baier is not that guy. He's rather milquetoast. He's prompter reading journalist. He's not going to be one of the guys who you're going to get into a back and forth with. So I don't think it really accomplished anything for them. The other thing is, Trump is such an anomaly politically.
Correct.
In that candidates run for office often hiding their flaws and keeping you away from things about them that they may not want you to know and focus on policy. There's not very much you're going to tell us about him that he doesn't know. So people are looking at him now as how he can perform the job.
Right.
Where I think her gulf is people's lack of belief in her ability to perform policy-wise. How does she close that gap?
And by the way, there's another piece of the puzzle you haven't mentioned, which to me has some implications for anybody in the communications business, and that is she and or vice presidential candidate Tim Walz were shielded so much from the press that they don't know how to handle an adversarial interview.
And man, those reps matter in an election.
Oh yeah.
Doing that a number of times, it helps. Now, the vice presidential debate, I thought, was kind of a watershed moment for the Trump campaign, because it seems directly after that debate, he started backing off some of the weird late night idiotic text messages that we had seen for so long.
Yes.
What's the impact of J.D. Vance?
I think J.D. Vance is good in that he showed that he could think on his feet, number one. I think that he showed a really good contrast between himself and the Democratic ticket. It was almost like the Trump-Harris debate was flipped upside down on its head, where J.D. Vance came across as reasonable and polished and smooth, whereas Tim Walz, he just had that deer in the headlights look throughout the interview, and I'm thinking whoever prepared him ought to be fired immediately.
Yeah, it's because it's a big stage. I mean, you go from a governor of a state where you've got the audience of your state population to an international audience, because, you know, people in other places are watching what this election is going to do. In the last minute here, we've got less than 2 weeks before the election. On either side, what do they need to do to seal the deal?
So Republicans need to turn out the vote like they have been doing. Democrats need to get into the game to turn out the vote, because the thing about it is their lead in 2020 was built on running up the score, you know, the old proverbial 3-touchdown lead at halftime.
Yeah.
Well, they're like a touchdown behind.
Yeah.
And I think they're in serious denial, where they now think that all of a sudden there'll be this miraculous number of votes that'll show up on election day. Democratic voters are early voters, and you cannot make up for lost time, in my opinion.
They've missed on the policy, I think, 1,000%. I think there's been too much of a reliance on the anti-Trump rhetoric, and because the people who don't like him, they know what he is, and most people know where they're voting now. The small number of people that haven't decided, you got to give them some protein.
If they even vote.
If they
and by the
vote.
way, that one thing that I think is a very salient point for your show, when I'm looking at the early voting, I am seeing that it is 44% down amongst mail-in voting and only 28% up amongst. I could easily see a 10 million drop in total vote come when all is said and done.
This is the first of 3 appearances John's going to have here talking about politics. He's going to be on the C-Suite next week as well. So, man, I appreciate it. And, man, it's going to be quite a couple of weeks for us here. Up next, we'll talk about a youth advisory committee that's connected to BRPD. And also, you can catch the show every Friday, streaming on WAFB.com and on the app, Friday nights, 7 p.m., replaying Saturday at 3 p.m. on WBXH. Some of you might remember when Chief Morse was here, I guess 3 weeks ago, he talked about the Youth Advisory Council. Here are some members of that council. So, you know, Tremaine didn't tell me I was going to be talking to these young ladies, so I'm going to have them introduce themselves to you. Your name?
Hello, everyone. My name is Keandria Jones.
Erin Brown.
Zoe Bengill. Avani Brown.
So I've enjoyed talking with these young ladies during the commercial break. First up, tell me about the Youth Advisory Council. What is it?
Well, basically, the Youth Advisory Council is basically bringing youth and police together to create, like, a better place for us, because normally we just really want to hear the youth's voice, because we want to, instead of listening and hearing the truth, we really want to, like, really dive deep into what the youth really think of us, like think of the police.
What have been some of the conversations that you guys have had since this thing started?
Like some of the things we went to is like going to like other places to really dive deep into what the Youth Advisory Council really, like other youth advisory councils really think of us, like, and really think about the things that we're doing like around the globe. Because of course the crime rate is horrible, like horrible here,
a little bit,
but we're just trying to make it like better, like around the globe.
I love that. And so we were talking about the different high schools that you guys are members of. Have you learned anything sitting in these conversations that you may not have learned before?
Yes, I learned that actually. I really thought that kids really actually liked the police. I thought kids actually wanted to be more involved, but a lot of kids don't really want to be involved with stuff like this. Like if I go to school, my shirt on, they look at me like, why are you dealing with this? Like why would I want any dealings with that? But that's something I really learned.
Well, why do you think that is?
Because kids really don't trust the police no more. They have no trust. It's so-called of they're telling if they speak. Kids really don't really trust the police no more.
Well, I love the fact that y'all are helping to bridge that gap. That's why I think this is so important. Now, y'all had 2 trips that you've already taken, one to New York, one to Seattle. Tell me about those.
So the one trip I could talk about is Seattle, Washington. It was a really eye-opening experience for us. The first thing we did when we got there was take a college tour at the University of Washington. And it was an amazing trip, amazing tour. We got to walk around the campus as if we were students. We got to eat at the food court. We got to learn about the variety of majors they had to offer, as well as the clubs and events they hosted there. And now that I'm a senior this year, this really was a great opportunity for me, because I got to learn about all these great opportunities they offer there in Washington, but also I really got to compare between the ones there as well as the ones we have here back at home, it was really nice, because now I can really weigh the pros and cons of how I want my college experience to go.
So well said. What about New York? How was New York?
We didn't go on the New York trip.
Well, y'all didn't make the trip to
We
New
didn't
York.
make the trip,
Okay.
but we did make the trip
Was
to
it
Seattle.
for similar purposes to kind of see what other youth advisory councils are doing?
Yes.
So this is something, you young ladies, and you've all talked about kind of what you want to do later on in life. What example do you hope you're setting for your peers, being a part of this council and having a chance to meet with the chief?
I think we are setting a standard for our youth, because not only do they have role models that's their age, we are setting an example for our youth to basically want to be something in life and want to do something better for themselves and become someone great in life.
So we've heard, I mean, they told me artist, pro basketball player or sports medicine, something in the medical field. And this young lady here, she wants to be in broadcasting one day. I think we might be able to help you out with that, or to introduce you to some people. Where do you guys want to go to school?
For me, I really want to either go to LSU or Southern,
Okay.
because that's where my people are.
I'm not all the way decided, but I would love to go to LSU.
Okay.
One of the schools I'm really looking at right now is Xavier University in New Orleans.
Okay.
And I think I want to go to Texas Southern University.
Texas Southern, interesting choice. Why Texas Southern?
Well, because I've just been seeing a lot of good things about the school, and I like it, and I think I would fit there.
So if you wanted to pitch someone to be a part of the Youth Advisory Council, what would you tell them?
Okay. If I wanted to pitch somebody to be a part of it, I'll just tell them it's a great opportunity. You know, we complain so much about our voice not being heard. This is a great opportunity to get your voice heard. It's a great opportunity to meet so many new people. Like, I met the police chief. Now I can say I know him. So if I ever need favors, ever need to talk to him, I know him. Like, he came to my school, he spoke to me. The kids were like, how you know him? It's a great opportunity. It's a very great opportunity.
Well, thank you, ladies. Y'all promise to come back and keep me updated?
Of course.
The Youth Advisory Council. Fantastic. All right, let's talk Helix Academy next. And the C-Suite podcast. Currently, Matt Moscona is the guest on the podcast. The next episode will feature a conversation with Jill Garner with Manners of the Heart. You can get the C-Suite at WAFB.com, or you can download that WAFB app. Love talking to the folks at Helix Academy. Sharita's returning, and she brought treasure with us. I could spell your name the way it was spelled. I'm gonna get that one right. So
It's not spelled like that.
it's not. No, it's got a Z in it.
It got a Z.
I know. That's what I'm saying. I wouldn't phonetically there. Helix is having their homecoming weekend this weekend, and before we get into that, let's talk about the Helix portfolio. For people who don't know, how many campuses do you have, and where are they?
So Helix Aviation Academy is a part of Helix Community Schools, which is a homegrown Baton Rouge network. So we have Helix Aviation Academy right now, which is K-9. We have Helix Legal Academy downtown. We have Helix Mentorship STEAM Academy, which will be a maritime academy next year.
Yeah.
We have Helix Artificial Intelligence, which is launching next year, starting with K-5 in Opelousas, St. Landry Parish. And the following year, 25-26, we will have Helix Medical Academy.
Mess with them.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to the one in Opelousas. It'll give me a chance to pass by Mama's Fried Chicken over there on 190. I'm telling y'all, it's worth the trip. Let's talk about homecoming weekend, right? Big festivities going on here. What's happening?
So it's homecoming week at Helix Aviation Academy. On tomorrow, we'll have our coronation, we'll have our homecoming dance. All the kids are excited about that. But Saturday, we have our parade. And our
So that's
parade
all that stuff is
so
Friday
fun.
as this airs. Tell me about the parade, because the weather is going to be fantastic.
The weather is going to be fantastic, which we are so happy about. The parade starts at 8 a.m. We will be in the community. We're coming out. We want the community to join us. It's a family fun event, and so we're excited to introduce ourselves to that community because we are new in the community, so we want them to come out and have fun with us. We have some elected officials in the parade. We have the East Baton Rouge Parish Library in the parade. We also have Helix Aviation and Helix Mentorship Academy in the parade, so we're super excited about that.
For people who are wondering when they hear your portfolio, if they wanted to get their kids into Helix, do you have room? And if so, what do they do?
Yes, so if you are specifically interested in Helix Aviation, you would go to helixaviationacademy.org. If you want to check out all of our schools, you would go to helixcommunityschools.org.
It is the coolest thing to watch y'all nuance the way education is done in the classroom. It's not the same thing. I was telling them when I was there a few years ago, these kids were doing an exercise on the impact the sun has orbiting the earth. Some of the stuff was so far over my head, and I'm just thinking, this is fantastic to watch. What's your goals? I mean, you're a founding principal there. What's your goal for any child and or family that comes to Helix?
Yeah, so at Helix Community Schools, all of our schools, we really like to connect our students to the workforce. Education is changing, and we want to ensure that our students know that education is not just about coming to class and looking in books, but it's about how you connect these skills that you learn. These are transferable job skills that you can actually use in the workforce. So although we prepare our kids for college, we want them to have an opportunity for true exposure.
And that has an impact on quality of life here in the region. I love the work that y'all are doing. Shout out to Preston Castile, who's on the Bessie board. He's one of Louisiana's best people. Looking forward to seeing what happens next at Helix. All right, next week, we're going to be talking more politics because we'll be less than a week from the election. Y'all get out this weekend and enjoy the weather. Go Jags, go Tigers. See you next week.